September 1912. A railroad construction crew working the Western Pacific extension through northern Nevada cut into a hillside they'd been blasting for 3 weeks. By sunrise the next morning, what they uncovered would be loaded onto 2 unmarked freight cars and shipped east before a single newspaper could print a word about it. Inside that hillside, buried 40 feet beneath the Red Basin floor, were 19 skeletons. Each one measured between 9 and 11 feet tall. Each one was wrapped in a reddish woven fibre that didn't match any known textile, and each one was laid out in a circular pattern around a central stone slab carved with symbols that nobody, not the foreman, not the railroad geologist, not even the Smithsonian representative who arrived 48 hours later, could identify. The official story said it was a misidentified Paiute burial site. Case closed. But here's what they don't tell you. The 23 men who worked that excavation were paid triple wages and made to sign documents they weren't allowed to read. The foreman who reported the find to the Reno newspaper was reassigned to a Pacific Northwest rail line within 11 days. The Smithsonian shipment never arrived in Washington, at least, not according to any record that still exists. And the section of railroad cut where the giants were found was rerouted 6 months later, abandoned and dynamited shut in 1919. If this video randomly disappears from YouTube or gets buried by the algorithm tomorrow, hit subscribe right now so you can find your way back. Because what was pulled out of that Nevada hillside in 1912 wasn't just bones, it was proof. The Red Basin sits in Pershing County, Nevada, about 90 miles northeast of Reno. It's a depression in the high desert that takes its name from the iron-rich clay, coloring the soil a deep rust red. The Paiute called the area Paunha, which translates roughly to where the ground remembers. Local oral tradition warned against digging in the basin, not for spiritual reasons, for practical ones. The tribal elders told early white settlers in the 1850s that the ground there was already full, that something had been put under it long before the Paiute themselves arrived. Most settlers laughed it off, a few didn't. The basin was sparsely populated by 1900, maybe 200 ranchers and miners spread across 400 square miles. There was no town, no church, no telegraph office. The nearest settlement of any size was Lovelock, 38 miles to the southwest. And Lovelock, if you've heard that name before, has its own giant problem. The Lovelock Cave excavation of 1911 had pulled out red-haired remains and oversized sandals just 1 year before what happened in the Red Basin. The Smithsonian had been on the ground in northern Nevada for over a year. They had teams. They had funding. They were already watching. So when the Western Pacific Railroad announced plans to extend a freight line through the Red Basin in early 1912, the bureaucratic interest was instant. Federal observers were assigned. A geologist named Edmund Riley was placed on the survey team. And Riley's name, as you'll see in a minute, doesn't exist in any Western Pacific personnel file dated after January 1913. The crew began blasting the eastern edge of the Red Basin in early August 1912. The terrain was harder than expected. The clay layer gave way to a compacted gravel and stone matrix about 30 feet down that the foreman, a man named Albert Krause, described in his log as set like concrete but not natural. Krause's logbook still exists partially. It's held in a private collection that descends from his granddaughter, who allowed 3 pages to be photographed for a 1987 regional history publication. In those pages, Krause describes the layer his crew was breaking through as laid down by hand, by someone who knew what they were doing. On the night of September 14th, 1912, a charge went off at the base of the cut and brought down roughly 18 feet of hillside. When the dust cleared the next morning, the crew found themselves looking into a chamber. Not a cave, a chamber. The walls were straight, the floor was level, and arranged in a perfect circle around a flat stone slab in the centre were 19 figures lying on their backs, arms folded across their chests, heads pointing outward like the spokes of a wheel. Krause halted work immediately. He sent a rider to Lovelock to telegraph the railroad office in Sacramento. Within 6 hours, a response came back. Do not photograph, do not remove, wait for federal observers. Krause did as he was told. He posted 4 men at the chamber entrance and waited. Edmund Riley arrived at the cut at dawn on September 15th. 2 unidentified men in dark suits arrived with him. They were not introduced, they did not speak to the crew. They examined the chamber for approximately 4 hours and then ordered the bodies removed. The skeletons were enormous. Krause measured one of them with his own surveying chain before Riley arrived. According to the logbook, the largest individual measured 11 feet 2 inches from heel to crown. The smallest, a partial skeleton showing signs of childhood, was 7 feet 4 inches. The skulls were elongated, narrowing toward the back in a pattern that resembles what anthropologists today call dolichocephalic, but exaggerated far beyond any known human population. The brow ridges were heavy. The teeth in the specimens where teeth remained were doubled rows in the upper jaw. Krause describes this detail with no apparent awareness that it would later become the single most cited feature in suppressed giant literature across North America. 2 rows of upper teeth, identical to what was reported at Lovelock Cave the year before, identical to what would be reported at the Ohio Ashtabula Mound 50 years earlier. The woven fiber wrapping each body was reddish-brown, coarse and intact, despite being buried for what Riley himself estimated to be no less than 1,400 years. The central stone slab was approximately 6 feet long, 3 feet wide and 8 inches thick. Its surface was carved with 47 symbols arranged in 3 concentric rings. None of the symbols matched Paiute petroglyphs. None matched any known Native American script, because no Native American written script existed in pre-Columbian North America. The symbols were geometric, angular, and according to one linguist who later analyzed Krause's hand-drawn copies, they shared structural similarities with both Iberian script from 600 BC and certain markings found at Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey. By the afternoon of September 16th, 2 freight cars had been requisitioned from the rail line and pulled onto a temporary siding at the cut. The bodies were crated individually. Each crate was sealed, stenciled with a federal property mark, and loaded onto the cars under armed guard. The stone slab was crated separately. The entire shipment left the Red Basin before sundown on September 17th, 3 days from discovery to removal. The crew was paid in cash. Each man received $87, roughly 3 months' wages, and was given a document to sign. The document, according to a 1968 interview with the last surviving crew member, a man named Henry Tobias, who was 19 years old at the time, contained language about perpetual confidentiality and federal authority under wartime preservation statutes. There was no war in 1912. The statute did not exist. Tobias was 75 when he gave the interview to a Nevada folklorist named Marcus Pendle. He died 8 months later. Pendle's recorded interview is held at the University of Nevada, Reno Special Collections, but access to the audio has been restricted since 2009 under a clause that allows the university to seal materials at the request of originating family members. No member of the Tobias family has ever publicly confirmed making that request. Albert Krause, the foreman, was reassigned to a Northern Pacific spur line in Washington state on September 28, 1912, just 11 days after the bodies left the Red Basin. He never worked in Nevada again. His logbook was confiscated by the railroad in 1913, returned to his widow after his death in 1934 with several pages missing. The 2 freight cars carrying the Red Basin remains were tracked as far as Ogden, Utah, where they were attached to an eastbound freight on September 19th. They cleared Cheyenne on September 21st. After Cheyenne, they vanish. There is no Smithsonian intake record for September, October, November, or December 1912 that lists any shipment from Nevada. There is no record of Edmund Riley continuing federal employment after January 1913. The Western Pacific Railroad's official corporate history, published in 1956, makes no mention of the Red Basin discovery despite documenting every other notable event along the line, including a 1914 derailment that killed 3 people and a 1922 labor dispute. The Reno Evening Gazette ran a small article on September 19, 1912, titled "Railroad Crew Uncovers Indian Burial Site in Pershing County." The article is 3 paragraphs long. It mentions no measurements, no symbols, no stone slab, no federal observers. It states only that Paiute remains of historical interest had been recovered and transferred to appropriate authorities for study. The Gazette's editor at the time, a man named Walter Brand, was replaced in November 1912. The reporter who wrote the article, Thomas Beale, left journalism entirely the following spring and opened a hardware store in Carson City. He never wrote another byline. In 1919, the section of rail line where the cut was made was officially abandoned. The Western Pacific cited geological instability and rerouted the freight line 4 miles south. Engineers later dynamited the abandoned cut, collapsing the hillside back over the chamber. Aerial photographs taken by the United States Geological Survey in 1947 show the collapse zone clearly. Nothing has been excavated there since. The land was transferred to the Bureau of Land Management in 1956 and designated a restricted geological survey zone. It remains restricted today. No archaeological permits have ever been granted. Here's where the Red Basin stops being an isolated incident. Between 1880 and 1925, there are at least 17 documented discoveries of giant skeletal remains in North America. Lovelock, Nevada, 1911. Ashtabula, Ohio, 1880s. Death Valley, California, 1908. The San Diego Coronado Islands, 1895. Catalina Island, multiple instances between 1913 and 1928. Each discovery follows the same pattern. Local crew uncovers the remains. Federal or institutional observer arrives within 48 to 72 hours. Bones are removed. Witnesses are paid or reassigned. Records vanish. Sites are sealed or destroyed. The Smithsonian Institution is named in at least 13 of the 17 cases. The same names appear repeatedly across different states and different decades. Names that the Smithsonian's official personnel records do not acknowledge. This isn't a coincidence. This isn't bad record keeping. This is a protocol, and the protocol has a goal. Because what these skeletons represent, if they existed, and the physical evidence says they did, is a complete dismantling of the accepted human timeline in North America. Mainstream archaeology states that humans arrived on this continent roughly 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, that they were small bands of nomadic hunter-gatherers, and that no advanced civilization existed here before European contact. The Red Basin chamber, with its engineered floor, its astronomical alignment, its carved slab, and its 11-foot bipedal occupants, breaks every part of that timeline at once. The architectural style of the Red Basin chamber is what researchers in the suppressed history community refer to as pre-flood construction. The same building principles, level floors, perfectly engineered burial alignments, non-native stone, geometric script, appear in sites across Eurasia attributed to what some call the Tartarian civilization. The mainstream view holds that Tartaria is a misreading of old maps and a misunderstanding of how cartographers labelled Asian territories. But the architectural fingerprint is consistent. Stone slabs aligned to celestial markers, geometric symbol systems, burial chambers featuring oversized human remains arranged in ritual patterns, the same fingerprint that's under the concrete in Van Buren, Arkansas, the same fingerprint sealed in Lovelock Cave, the same fingerprint dynamited shut in the Red Basin. If a global civilization existed before recorded history, and if its inhabitants were physically larger than modern humans, and if it left burial sites across multiple continents arranged in the same precise patterns, then the question isn't whether the cover-up exists. The question is, what they're protecting us from knowing. Because the implication isn't just that history is older than we thought. The implication is that the current narrative, the one that places European arrival in the 1490s at the start of the American story, was constructed deliberately, built on top of something, just like the warehouses built on top of the Arkansas graveyard, just like the freight line rerouted over the Nevada cut, just like the rubble dynamited over the chamber in the Red Basin. Here's what they couldn't bury. Albert Krause's surviving logbook pages exist. The 1987 photographs of them exist. The Reno Evening Gazette article, sanitized as it was, exists in the state archives. Henry Tobias's 1968 interview exists, locked but real. The USGS aerial photographs of the collapse zone exist. The Bureau of Land Management's restricted zone designation exists, and you can look it up in the Federal Register today. And in 2014, a private ground-penetrating radar survey conducted along the boundary of the restricted zone just outside the federal line where private land begins detected 3 rectangular anomalies at depths between 38 and 44 feet. Uniform spacing, geometric alignment, the exact dimensions described in Krause's logbook. Something is still down there. Sealed under dynamite rubble, federal restriction, and 114 years of carefully maintained silence. The chamber is still down there. And somewhere, in a warehouse, in a vault, in a sealed Smithsonian sub-basement that the public is told doesn't exist, 19 oversized skeletons and 1 carved stone slab are still down there too. They didn't destroy the evidence, they just moved it. Because evidence that complete, that physically undeniable, can't be destroyed. It can only be hidden, and hidden things have a way of resurfacing. The flood revealed Arkansas in 1874. A railroad cut revealed Nevada in 1912. The next reveal is coming. It always does. The only question is whether anyone will be allowed to talk about it before the freight cars arrive, and the foremen are reassigned, and the witnesses get their hush money and their early heart attacks. That's the story of Nevada's Red Basin giants, the cut that opened the chamber, the Smithsonian that emptied it before dawn, and the silence that's been holding the lid down ever since. If you made it to the end of this video, the algorithm is already pushing it down. So subscribe, share it with someone who needs to see it, and stay buried with us, because the archive isn't finished yet.